The member for Canberra, and call the member for Warringah.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Nature Repair Market Bill. I welcome this bill, which represents a step towards achieving a nature-positive Australia. And I also acknowledge the government's professed commitment to protecting 30% of Australia's land and seas by 2030. However, I call on the government to be bolder and to state clearly and definitively that it is committed to achieving nature-positive Australia at a minimum by 2030. To this end, there are more actions that need to be taken. For example, we must, without delay, stop all native forest logging. And incredibly, we must protect rainforests, in particular areas like the Tarkine forest in Tasmania. These must be protected. We can't talk about biodiversity loss and conservation and continue to ransack pristine and important ecosystems and environment. So it's my hope that this bill is a step towards that, and we're going to do better. In Warringah, my constituents are passionate about the protection of nature, and we celebrate our access to the ocean, the protected Cabbage Tree Bay Marine Park Reserve, the Sydney Harbour Trust and the national parks at North Head and Middle Head as well, as the protected areas of Manly Dam and Bantry Bay. We would love to see more of these areas and greater protection of wildlife corridors and investment in the restoration of nature. It's my hope that this bill will assist in the achievement of that we can do better on protecting our environment. We need to pull all the levers at our disposal to rebuild nature, and if private investment is a willing participant, then that is great. I'd also like to thank the active engagement of the many groups concerned about this issue, including the Australian Land Conservation Alliance, World Wildlife Fund, Australian Conservation Foundations and many others. So what does this bill do? The bill establishes a nationally regulated market for investment in nature. It sounds great, but the question is who will invest and for what purpose? While there is much discussion at present about the value of nature, the Australian Conservation Foundation and Pollination Group found that roughly half of our economy, or some $900 billion of Australia's economy, directly depends on nature. So this is not a nice-to-have, this is a must-have. Also, 50% of global GDP depends on nature. And now this is, we're talking food, we're talking water. All these aspects are directly linked to nature. Yet despite this, there hasn't been significant investment in its protection, let alone repair and conservation. There's this idea often that these things are separate, that somehow it's a nice-to-have, when it is intrinsically linked to so much of our way of life. So in briefings about this bill, the government has made much and many speeches in this place about the predicted $137 billion in investment that this market could drive into nature as modelled by the PwC report. Now, many also dispute this advice. So I think it's really important to put that into perspective, that even that report by PwC argued that a regulated market is just one pillar of the four needed to drive investment in nature. The other pillars that are urgently needed include a national biodiversity strategy and plan, the establishment of national standards and foundational science, a regulatory framework, compliance and enforcement measures, and I would argue government investment to kickstart this market. These points are supported throughout the submissions to the Senate inquiry, with the key concerns surrounding the integrity of the market and the lack of driver for investment without all the other pillars lining up. So again, this looks good in practice, it's good on paper, but for it to work, it's going to need a much more significant and serious commitment. The Australian Sustainable Finance Institute stated in their submission that the development of a nature market framework will not be sufficient to redirect financial flows toward nature-positive outcomes. I've called on the government, and I've discussed this with the minister, and I call on the Prime Minister to show leadership, that there needs to be public funding to incentivise, to kick-start this market. And so just as we saw with, for example, renewable energy, where the CFC and ARENA kick-start took care of some of that initial market risk so that the private sector could follow, the same needs to happen for this market to work, to be successful. A national biodiversity strategy and plan. Australia is a party to the Convention on Biological Diversity and has had an overarching strategy for biodiversity since 1996, the latest iteration of which is the Australian Strategy for Nature in 2019-2020 to 2030. However, the Samuels Review released in 2020 showed that our current national environmental protection laws are not working. The 2019 Samuels Review of the EPBC Act criticised that Act, saying it's complex, it's cumbersome and it results in duplication with state and territory development approval processes. It adds cost to business and often with little benefit to the environment. The reform of the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act is urgent and we need to see those enhanced protections in place now. Now, that was in 2020. The last government failed to meaningfully implement those recommendations, and this government has to date also failed to implement those recommendations. The current government, when in opposition, called for urgent action and implementation of the recommendations, but now in government we see further delay. Many are now saying that despite the government's commitment to implement the reforms by the end of the year, the timeline is slipping and next year is now more likely. And this is all vital for this bill to have meaning. If we want this to work, it needs the EPBC Act amendments. It needs the Samuel Review recommendations to be implemented. Without these reforms, there's no true transparency about how this nature market will operate. The reform of the EPBC Act will determine whether the credits generated from this scheme can be used as offsets and therefore whether they will actually enhance nature or merely maintain status quo at best. So I believe offsets can be a useful tool, but the net result must be nature positive. Business as usual is not working and not acceptable. So I welcome the Minister's reassurance that it is in the intent, but I won't be convinced of this until we actually see that EPBC Act amendment legislation. The second pillar is standards and foundational science. National environmental standards are and must be a part of the EPBC Act reform. They were central to the Samuels Review recommendations. In addition, both government and industry need timely data and analytics to provide them with a robust baseline. So I welcome the funding in the federal budget to establish the Environment Information Australia to enhance that data collection and improve transparency of the performance of our natural environment protection. So this new body will be essential in monitoring the performance and success of the nature market. Specifically, within this bill, there are concerns about the permanency of the credits. The bill allows for a creation of credits for anywhere from 25 to 100 years or less than 25 years as agreed by the regulator, where what is the value of biodiversity credit of less than 25 years is a very relevant question. The government's response to this has been that it will be market-driven price. However, combined with broader concerns about integrity, I don't support the inclusion of this level of flexibility. The less than 25 years as agreed by the regulator is problematic and undermines the integrity of the scheme. Thirdly, a regulatory framework. Arguably, this bill will help to achieve some regulatory control through the establishment and role of a market regulator. However, there are questions about whether the Clean Energy Regulator is the right body to oversee this market. There are clear conflicts in certain cases. The Clean Energy Regulator acknowledged in their submission that while the Clean Energy Regulator has sophisticated tools and strong regulatory framework, there may be some gaps in our current skills and toolset to monitor compliance for some nature repair market methods. And while there are clear benefits in having the same body oversee the carbon market and the nature market, we need to make sure that the Clean Energy Regulator is resourced to effectively fulfil both roles, or else we will see further questions of the integrity of the markets, as we're still dealing with in the carbon market space. My amendments, I've proposed amendments in relation to this bill and those of other crossbench members, are seeking to implement some of the recommendations of the recently completed Chubb review to ensure better trust and integrity in the market system and the carbon market into the nature market. Fourthly, the compliance and enforcement aspect. Clearly, in addition to the overhaul of the EPBC Act, there must be an authority set up to police and enforce obligations under the relevant legislation, in particular the overhauled EPBC Act. The establishment of Environment Protection Australia will be essential as an independent cop on the beat to enforce standards and compliance. Without this, the government's strategy, however good intended, it might otherwise and will fail. Tradable certificates, such as those envisaged by the Nature Repair Market Bill, may serve well as a carrot, but the hard reality is there also must be a stick. Government investment. I and many groups who are active in this space strongly feel that the government investment in this market is key and absolutely essential to the achievement of the desired nature positive outcome. The government has a responsibility to kickstart investment and help mitigate risk. In order for this market to be successful, we need co-investment from government. So we need a Clean Energy Finance Corporation equivalent, a Nature Finance Corporation. I would suggest that the government and the Treasurer should be putting some significant funds behind. We can't achieve the objectives without it. The government argues that the Natural Heritage Trust can fulfil that role, but I don't believe they have sufficient mandate or resources to adequately fulfil that role at present. The Bob Brown Foundation put it well in their submission. The purchase of submarines under AUKUS deal is direct government investment of some $368 billion. It's not tradable certificates or offsets, it's straight-up government spending because prevention is better than cure on national security. I absolutely agree. But prevention is better than cure when it comes to conservation as well, especially if 50% of our GDP is tied up in nature. And so it is incredibly important that we address that. So I fear, however well-intentioned this bill is, it doesn't go far enough to enable that target to be achieved, and the government has missed an opportunity today. Repairing nature is a key part of making sure we have a sustainable future, of having any chance of negating the worst effects of climate change. We know there are so many impacts already locked in. So restoring and regenerating the degraded natural environment is a critical part of ensuring that the planet's survival, our way of life, our ecosystems. We can bring back to life dying ecosystems and delicate natural balances recognised and restored. In other words, participating in a market which puts a value on strategies to achieve nature positive and must not be just convenient, a new way of offsetting other shortfalls in corporate behaviour. It's a critical end in itself. These tradable certificates need to be additional to other measures taken by individuals and corporate entities and should not be just used as offsets. There are many groups who have raised concerns in relation to that. So it's really important that the government grapples with these concerns so that this can have some integrity. Of course, there must be balancing of priorities. And, for example, the National Farmers Federation made a submission that the legislation must first and foremost address the needs of the farm sector. Others can follow. Again, that is an interest at work. WWF indicated that the use of nature repair certificates to meet biodiversity offset obligations should be ruled out or at least deferred until the nature repair market is established. The Property Council of Australia, our members have further reported there will be a significant appetite for purchasing biodiversity certificates and engaging in projects if the NRM functions effectively and delivers high-integrity environmental outcome. So we can see from all of this that there is some concerns. Finally, empowerment of rural and remote Indigenous communities. It's incredibly important, and I will have provided amendments to that effect, to ensure that remote and regional communities, in particular Indigenous communities, are at the centre of this land conservation. Finally, I'd like to thank the many organisations and volunteers who dedicate so much time, so many hours to cleaning up and protecting our local environment. There are there's incredible initiatives. We know Australians care about their environment, and to date, politics and regulations haven't properly reflected that. But we are now at a time where it is a priority, and so many, especially our young people, are calling on this place to do more to protect our environment.
I thank the honourable member for her contribution and the question before the House. Now is the